Hello. I wanted to take a little time to make this video to talk about what I see as some confusion about how Stanley numbered their squares, especially in their first 20 years or so. And when I first started collecting Stanley squares, I was seeing listings all over the place for lots of different types of squares that looked very different, and they were all being advertised as number ones or number twos. And as a new collector, I just couldn't figure out what was going on, and I was having a hard time coming up with an actual list of, what are all the squares that Stanley made. Now, maybe this is a problem that was unique to me, but and maybe everybody else has it figured out. But for anybody who has the same questions, hopefully this video will help explain things. So what did I do? The first thing I did is I got John Walter's book, and admittedly this is the first edition, not the second edition, so maybe there's some changes there, but I turned to the section on squares, and started looking, and it was like, oh, number one, number one, number one, number one, number two, number two, number two, number two, number two, more number twos, another number two. And so I think you can obviously see that this book left me with more questions than I had actually come with, and no answers, because like, what the heck are all these number one and number twos, and why is that? So the next thing I did was to acquire the Stanley catalogs from the early years. So these are the two volumes of the Stanley catalog collection. And so let's take a look here so we can see what's going on. So this is 1867, and we can see we have number one and we have number two designated here. And if we flip to 1872, we'll see that we have, once again, a number one and a number two. And if we flip to 1874, once again, we have number one and number two. And I'm showing different years here just because things are laid out well, but, that continues. You see number one and number two being applied to, all sorts of different squares, all throughout the 1860s and 1870s. And, the other thing that I noticed was that not all squares had numbers. Here we have improved miter tri-squares and improved miter squares. There's no number designation here. So what, so I thought Walter's book would explain it, and then I thought the catalogs would explain it. And it wasn't until I really started digging in, trying to understand what was going on, that I figured it out. And we'll come back here to 1867, because I think this illustrates it the best. And we can see that, so these are plated tri-squares. And here we have number one, described as the best plated tri-squares, and number two, just regular plated tri-squares. And so it becomes apparent that these numbers are talking about the quality of the square. These are both plated tri-squares. We simply have a number one quality and a number two quality, and we can see that here in the physical examples. So here's the number one, and here's the number two. We can see that the blade is wider on the number one. The brass wear strip is thicker on the number one. The size of the escutcheon is larger. The thickness of the handle is larger. It's all around, it's just a beefier square, and higher quality. And the price is reflected as such in the catalog. But these are known as the plated tri-squares, number one quality and number two quality. Here we have Winterbottom's patent tri-squares, combined miter and tri-squares. This is the number one, and this is the number two. Once again, we can very easily see the quality difference. This is an iron frame, and this is a wood handle with a brass wear guard. Once again, higher quality, and as such, priced accordingly in the catalogs. Here we have the improved tri-squares, the number 1 and the number 2. The number 1, we see here, has iron frame all the way around, whereas the number 2 is known as the half frame, only has here and here, so much better wear resistance, once again priced accordingly against the quality. So we can really start to understand that in the early years, those numbers in the catalogs are not trying to be model numbers. They're not trying to uniquely identify a square across all squares. You must state the model of the square, which is the name, plated tri-square, winter bottoms, improved tri-square, for that number to have any meaning at all, because these were all available around the same time. Now, so when did that change? Because we have, unique model numbers now, and that change occurred in 1888. That was the first catalog where every single square, here you can see, we saw this earlier, it had no model number, and now it does. 1888 is the year that we get the individual model numbers. So prior to that time, the numbers are simply a quality designation, nothing more. And that's really where the confusion comes about, because I think many people treat them as a model number instead of what they actually are. Now, so what we can take from that, though, is I think those quality numbers actually informed what became the model numbers in 1888. Let's take the winter bottom patent squares, for example. Both of these, the 1 and the 2, were still being made in 1888. The number 2 was not this style anymore. It was this style. And so they just took, since they were making both still, they went ahead and turned the quality numbers into the model numbers. So this became permanently the number 1, and this became permanently individually known as the number 2. Now the plated squares, they were no longer making the number 1 quality in 1888. The number 2 had been replaced, moved from the pointed trefoil escutcheon to the lobed. So this is the number 2. They had already used the number 2 model number over here, and so what did they do? They added a 0, and this became the number 20 that we're all familiar with today. Down here, we had the 1 and the 2. This version of the number 2 quality was only made for a year or two. It was then swapped out for this, the lead infill version, and this was known as the number 2. And so when 1888 came along, they needed new model numbers for these. Once again, 1 and 2 had already been assigned. So for this, just like they did with the 2, add the 0 to make the 20, they took the number 1, added a 0, and made it the 10. This is the number 2, and so they stuck a 1 in front of that and made this the 12. So I think it's interesting how the quality designators really influence what became the final model numbers in 1888. So hopefully that explains what's going on, how Stanley modeled their squares. I hope you learned something and enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.